We're here today with Preeti Wilson, who is a graduate of the Rehabilitation Counseling Program. Preeti graduated several years ago and has been employed in a public school setting, and I appreciate her being able to share her experiences with us. I'd like her first to talk about her background and tell us how she got into the Rehabilitation Counseling Program, and tell us a little bit about where she comes from. And then she'll tell us about what she has done since graduating, and then she'll share her thoughts on what she'll be doing in the future. So, Preeti, tell us where you grew up and where you started from.
Well, I grew up in eastern Kentucky in a small town called Belfry in Pike County.
You were born in Belfry?
No, I was born in India.
In India?
Yes.
How long did you live in India?
I lived there for a year and a half.
A year and a half?
Yes.
So you were a year and a half old when your family moved to Pike County?
No, actually they moved to New York.
To New York?
And we lived in the Bronx, and then we moved to Ohio, and then we moved to eastern Kentucky.
I see. Okay.
And I lived in eastern Kentucky for over 12 years, and then I went away to school.
Why did your family move to eastern Kentucky?
Because it was a rural area, and my father practices medicine. He thought that he might like to go into an area like that to practice.
I see.
So after I completed high school, I went to Center College and did my undergraduate there in psychobiology. So I was interested in psychology, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my degree once I graduated. So I took some classes at UK, some more classes in psychology, and I talked to some of my friends who had been in the rehabilitation counseling program, and what they were doing sounded interesting to me, vocational counseling for people with disabilities. So I looked into it, applied, and was accepted. I took some classes, to make sure this is what I really wanted to do, actually, before I applied. I liked the classes and did well and got to know the faculty, and then once I was applied and accepted, I started my classes, and I graduated in December of '97.
So tell us, if you don't mind, a little bit about what it was like growing up in eastern Kentucky. And the reason I ask that is because in rehabilitation we talk about not only diversity, but we talk about persons from different backgrounds adjusting and assimilating into environments in which perhaps they would not be in the minority. And you certainly, from my knowledge of eastern Kentucky, realize that you were not in the minority in terms of your ethnic background. And unless you were, I don't think you were.
No, oh, you mean like how many Indian people there were in?
Well, there aren't that many.
No.
People with that background. Well, tell us what it was like growing up in that environment.
Well, eastern Kentucky is a very unique place. Most people there are very friendly, and it's a tight group of people in the community. So at first it was kind of hard getting adjusted because we were newcomers coming into a different situation. But once I, met people through school and through families that we had been doing things with, I felt comfortable. But it did feel a little bit strange going into a setting where I was not part of the majority, like where I would be in New York or even Lexington. And I'm not sure what else.
That's fine, because as I was mentioning, I think sometimes we will work with clients or customers in rehabilitation who themselves feel that they are not part of the larger group. For example, in this community now, there are a lot of persons who have Hispanic backgrounds moving to this area, and they work to a great extent out in the rural parts of the county doing farm work activities, and many people in the city don't even realize how big a Hispanic community there is here, and so the experience for those individuals is something that may not be understood or appreciated by the majority population in terms of the factors of adjustment and understanding different cultural values and religion and holidays and those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I asked, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that topic with us.
You're welcome.
So you entered the rehabilitation counseling program.
Yes, and
in spite of efforts to discourage you by myself. I'm
yes,
just teasing you.
I know. I'm not sure if you are or not.
Oh, I'm just teasing you. And then you graduated.
Yes.
And tell us about the work that you have done since graduation. And you graduated in December 1997, so now it's May of 2001. So that's
right.
about that's what 3.5 years ago.
Yes.
Tell us what you've done career-wise during that time.
Well, I think it actually started when I was doing my practicum while I was in the rehab program. My practicum was at Bluegrass Career Services, and it's a adult service provider agency which does job placement for adults with disabilities. And I wasn't really sure if that was an area that I wanted to go into or not, because I had heard so much about, Department of Voc Rehab, and it seemed like that was the ultimate goal that we were trying to reach, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that either. So once I did the practicum, I can't remember how long the practicum time is.
About what semester?
Mm-hmm.
About 14, 15 hours a week during the semester.
And then I started my internship at Department of Voc Rehab with some great counselors and got to see a wide variety of different individuals with disabilities. And while I was doing my internship, a position came open with Fayette County Public Schools as a job trainer. And I thought, well, I'm not sure if this is really something I want to do, but it sounds interesting. I would do, on-the-job training with students in a high school with disabilities. So I applied and was accepted into that position. Began that position in October of '97, and Dr. Crystal was very good with letting me start into that position while I was finishing my internship. And I graduated in December of '97. Once I graduated, I was just working full-time for Fayette County Schools, working with various students, various types of students. I was exposed to many disabilities. Like, I've worked with students who are autistic. I've had a student who's schizophrenic, students with ADHD, Down syndrome, mental retardation, depressive illness, and I think it has exposed me to a lot of different areas. The program which I am I'm moving on to another part of my life right now, but when I worked with Fayette County Schools, we were a collaborative program between the Department of Voc Rehab and Fayette County Schools to do this on-the-job training program for high school students, and it's a statewide program.
So you were an employee of the public school system.
Yes.
Okay. And as a rehabilitation counselor, you did job training.
Right.
Tell us first how students were referred to you, and then tell us, once they were referred, what you did with them.
Well, the students were referred to me through the ARC process in the public school system.
And the ARC process is
Admission and Release Committee in the public schools, which determines proper placement for students with disabilities. And in that meeting, there's usually the parents are involved, the teachers, the students, the school facilitator, a member from DVR, and me and myself. And usually the DVR counselor will refer a client to me before we start the job training process, and we just go from there. Once the student or client is referred to me, we'll determine 3 to 5 areas of interest which the student might have. Now, these are students that aren't going to go on to college or vocational school, and usually they're the students with the most severe disabilities. So we'll determine areas in which they're interested, and go out into the community, contact different employers, and set up this job training program with them.
So you would participate in the admissions and release committee meetings, and in that process you would provide input perhaps on what services you might be able to offer in terms of job training.
Correct.
And job placement, and help to make a determination as to whether the plans that were being discussed were appropriate for the individual.
Correct.
So would you have an opportunity to review the records of that person, the school records or the reports, and then help to make a judgment on what would be appropriate based on that information?
Yes. And usually, there's also a school psychologist there to go over the student's evaluation on what they believe the determination should be for that student. And we go over the report in the meeting and just give our input on whether or not we believe this program would be something that would be beneficial for the student.
And state rehabilitation was there too.
Yes.
How did you interface with the state rehabilitation people? Because you said you did job training, but they also do that. So how did you work together, or did you work together with some people and not together with other people?
Well, we worked together with DVRs, the school counselors, and they were there. They used to come out on the job sites when necessary, or if like I work with Tim Elam, if he wants to see how my student is doing, he'll come out to the job site and give his advice on what accommodations may be necessary for that student. And we would communicate with each other on what each of us would think is the best placement or best outcome for this student. So we would meet usually once a week at school on a determined day and discuss what we felt for these students.
So the students who were referred to your program were persons who were still in school?
Yes, they're high school students.
These are high school students, and they would spend part of the time with you, and part of that time would be doing a work or job activity.
Right.
And so would you actually be in the community at a job site?
Yes, we would go to say that one student is interested in clerical work. Well, we would find different places in the community where we have established as placement sites and go to that place and, introduce the student, describe his or her abilities, and go from there, determine whether or not this place would be a good site for the student to work. And it would be part of the school day in which they would participate in this program, usually around 3 to 4 hours a day.
So would you actually do job development, identify jobs in the community? Yes,
we did job development. It was many times it was student specific, but there are 5 trainers in Fayette County, 1 at each public high school, and in the beginning of the school year we would all go out together to different sites in the community where we thought that there would be different jobs that were appropriate for some of our students, and develop those as sites.
Now, were these sites that you would use as part of job training, or would these be actual jobs that you'd be placing the students in permanently once they graduate, or a combination of those two?
It was a combination. It would depend on the student. If the student, usually we would at least take them to two to three different sites, because we're not sure what the student is able to do and what they're not able to do. So before we take them out, we can't determine whether or not we believe they can be successfully employed in the community. So that's why we just look at this as a placement, either a possible just for training or for future placement.
So how did you deal with employer attitudes about what you were doing? Did you find that there was resistance at times, or did you find that employers are very receptive?
The majority of the time, employers are very receptive, but we did find a few who were resistive. And when that happens, you don't want to go up and try to, you don't want to push the issue with them. I guess you could if you really wanted to, but then once the student is there and I'm not with the student on the job, I don't know how the student will be treated, so we wouldn't, pursue that job as a placement site. But for the most part, most employers were receptive.
And when you say you did job training, tell us a little bit about what that entailed. In other words, did you spend time, let's say, doing what I would refer to as classroom sort of work with students? Classroom work being things like helping people learn good work habits or teach good work habits and resume writing and how to get a job and how to handle conflict in the workplace or how to handle different issues that might come up, those classroom issues. And then did you also work as what we might refer to a job coach might work to make sure that the person was doing the job in the manner that it was supposed to be done?
Mm-hmm. Well, we did some work with the students in the classroom, with the teachers. We would collaborate with them on different activities we thought would, benefit the students. For example, if a student has a problem, has a emotional problem or has a hard time dealing with conflict, we would do an activity in the classroom dealing with that. And then after that first step of getting to know the student in the classroom, we would go on to the next step, which is going and observing the student on community-based instruction, which is a program where the students work out in the community, but it's with a transitional assistant. So that's the second step before the students come with us or go on to vocational school. So at that time, we're just observing to see what they can do, work with the student, and then the third step is actually a job coaching, where we would go out and do the job with the student until they can do the job on their own.
And what size caseload did you have?
It varied from maybe 5 to 10 students a year.
Okay. And so you had 5 to 10 students a year.
Mm-hmm.
Did you continue to work with families during this process? Yes,
that's the majority of. A lot of what we do is we have to communicate with the family and with the teachers. I mean, it's a great job if anyone's thinking about applying for a position or is interested in this type of job, because you're out in the community, you work with the teachers, you're not sitting at a desk all day, you're working with the students one-on-one, and you also have to communicate well with the parents, because sometimes if you go in and try to do and you don't know their child, you don't want to, upset them because you're trying to teach a child a certain activity, or, for example, trying to, one thing that I worked on with some of my students was trying to be on time for work when they had to meet me. Some students had a really hard time with that, and sometimes I did not want to upset the parents because they had known the child for 18 years and tried to have the student wear a watch, do all that every day of their life, and have not been able to achieve that. So when I came in and I thought, well, let me try this, and it wouldn't work, sometimes the parents would get upset. So that was an important part, which I didn't learn, going in, but I learned after a few months that that's a big part of the job.
Now, I understand also that you work with a variety of persons who had different disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
And I know in public rehabilitation we talk about giving individuals choice, mm-hmm. and giving individuals the opportunity to create their own rehabilitation plans. Did you find that working in the school system and working with the admissions and release committee that individuals had the same type of choice that we talk about in public rehabilitation? Or how were decisions arrived at?
Usually, well, it depends on if they're over 18 or not. If they're not over 18, then the parents had they usually helped us determine what they thought was the best for their child. But, we also asked the child what they wanted, because we're not going to take the student out to one job site if they don't even like that area. So, but after they're 18, we have to invite the parents. The student wants the parents to come to the meeting, then we can welcome them and invite them. But if they don't, we don't have to invite them. And we try to base it on what they want to do, but we have to look at realistic goals too. I mean, if the student wants to go to college and that's not, a viable goal, then we're not going to say, okay, let's go ahead and try it. We have to see, based on their testing scores, based on, what kind of classes they're in school, if they're on diploma track or certificate. I mean, we have to look at all those areas.
I see. What about doing counseling? Did you do counseling with the persons who were referred to you?
Yes, we did. Usually the counseling would be either in the classroom. I would get together with the teacher and we would do counseling with the student together. And a lot of times the counseling went on in students were transported in my vehicle, and the counseling went on in the car or at the job site.
How can you describe, just in very general terms, the severity of the disability that people had? In other words, were you working with persons who would be classified as being severely impaired or very severely impaired, who would need what is referred to as supported employment services? Yes,
I'd say the majority, I'd say maybe 70% of the students I worked with were severely impaired. And upon graduation, most of them are referred on to support employment agencies.
And for some people, did the jobs that you developed for them last and become regular full-time jobs?
Yes, actually, I have a couple of students. Actually, the first year I started, one of my students, we worked in a hotel, and that's where he wanted to try to get a paying job. So we went for that job, and he's actually still at that job site, which he's been there since '98. I have another student who, and so for some students, competitive employment is not realistic. So I have one student who is in a sheltered workshop, and that's the best option for him. He's still there doing great there. Actually, it's amazing to see how many students stay at these job sites for the periods of time they do, because they're actually dedicated to what they do. They're rarely absent from school. I mean, they're pretty devoted, to what their job is.
What would you say, if you can kind of summarize the in this area, what would you say the major obstacle was for an individual being able to retain employment? When I'm thinking of, is it the fact of lack of knowing how to do the job? Is it social skills on the job? Is it just knowing that if you don't come in on time, you're supposed to call to say you're late, or just being reliable? Or would it be even family factors like lack of support from the family, and then the individual loses interest? Can you think of which areas were the most problematic in terms of success on the job or success doing the job?
It seemed like the problem areas were, probably in this order. Transportation was a big problem. If there's a job open for a student where they can go, but the public transportation system doesn't start that early, then we have to look into alternative methods. If the parents are not able to take their student to the job site, or if Wheels does not go out that early, I mean, there's a lot. Transportation does seem to be one of the primary obstacles. Another obstacle is lack of support from the family. It just, of course, that varies. Some families are very supportive, wonderful, want to work, to do their best to make sure that their child is employed. And then the third obstacle, I would say, is social skills, lack of social skills on the job.
You didn't mention anything about not knowing how to do the job.
No.
That wasn't an issue.
Not usually, because I'm actually there doing the job coaching with the student, and I stay with the student until he or she can do the job. Now, I'm not going to take the student to learn how to. I'm not going to take the student to a place where where they're not going to be able to do the job. I'm going to choose a site which is realistic for attaining employment upon graduation.
Right. How did you address the transportation issue?
Or how am I addressing it?
Well, maybe there wasn't anything to address.
Well, it was actually, I would try to talk to the parents to see if they knew some way for their child to get to work. I would call or go down to Lextrans bus station, go down there and get a bus schedule, maybe do some bus training with the students, or contact Wheels, take the student to fill out an application at Wheels, get a bus pass, get a bus ID, do all that, and just try our best to see that they can have a means of transportation to their job.
Now, to change the subject a little bit, how did you feel your preparation in the master's degree was in terms of enabling or allowing you to be successful on this job? Did you feel that you were well prepared, or were there deficits that we should have done and didn't do? How do you feel your training prepared you for the work that you did?
I think the training was very helpful because it was related to a variety of these issues. The training helped me with counseling issues with the students. It helped with some other areas were learning how to deal with students from various backgrounds. That training helped. Learning about a lot of the legal issues in different jobs was very helpful, because when we go out to develop job sites, we need to know what each company's rules are and make sure that we abide by them. I thought it was pretty helpful. There might have been some areas where there wasn't training, but my job, since it was in the school, it was a little bit different. And sometimes I felt like maybe there was a deficit in how things function in the school, maybe in some special education areas and some policies. But of course, they always change,
right. And now you're moving into coming back to school and going into a school psychology program.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm interested in that because I want to do more counseling and testing, and I really enjoy working in the school system. And this way, I've had a lot of training and experience in the vocational area, and now I hope to go in to learn more about testing and establishing or determining placements from that testing.
Well, thank you, and best of luck to you, and appreciate you sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you for having me.